welcome everyone. My name is John Frangakis. I'm going to be emceeing as well as one of the panelists today. So bear with me. I'm also driving on the slides. So we're going to be talking today. Let's see if I can get my slides going. All right, here we go. Good, we're moving. It'll be Mick and myself. Just a little background on me. I was one of the founders of a company called Mira. Back in 2014, we set out to sort of build a measurement platform for the out-of-home channel. And then about a year and change ago, we were acquired by Reveal Mobile, which today I'm Chief Commercial Officer. I would say I'm not totally sure what that job description entails. But I know that I look after the out-of-home part of our business, which is, we're still calling Mira. And that's where I focus. And I'm gonna let Mick do a little bit of do his background here, and then I'll jump into the agenda.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Mick's SVP for media sales for the Volta charging organization. I come to Volta with 20 years of experience, predominantly on the CPG brand marketing side with companies like Procter & Gamble and the Kellogg's Company. Also some agency experience with big holdcos, specifically at Publicis, and last but not least, media and promo with Quotient and iView, and of course, Volta. Super excited to be here. Thanks, John.
And one part that Mick left out is he is a former Army officer. I am a former Marine officer, and Army Navy is playing this weekend. So we've got that going for us.
Hey, Navy, let's go.
So I did not go to the Naval Academy, so I don't get as excited as Mick does. Good American. All right, so today we are going to start with a little bit about the evolution of out-of-home, of measurement, particularly in out-of-home, and sort of where we are today. And in that I'm going to cover sort of how we do it, where we think the state of measuring out-of-home is today. I'm going to let Mick take over and cover a little bit about the buying essentials. We'll talk about retail media, and then we are going to review a campaign that we work together to measure for a shared customer that we have, and we'll get into some of those details. And then we're going to look to save a few minutes here for some Q&A. So let me start by saying, please feel free to message in any questions that you have along the way. I'll try to remind you, but I am pretty forgetful, so I might forget to remind you. But any questions that pop up along the way, please go ahead and I'll pick a few of those at the end, and we'll answer as much as we can. So without further ado, so out of home historically, I'm sure a lot of this is stuff that you've already heard. Not a whole lot of understanding around metrics, particularly performance metrics. I think in the advancement of out of home, we started seeing a lot more around impressions. You could look at where campaigns run and understand something about census block groups to understand who may have reached. There's the metrics that we were getting into were social mentions and brand awareness. But what we have historically lacked, particularly when we started the business, started Mira in 2014, was metrics around performance, the metrics that advertisers really want to sink their teeth into to understand how well that channel works, particularly lower and mid funnel types of metrics around conversions and sales, things like this historically just really haven't been available. Fast forward to today, out of home is a completely different channel than it used to be. It is very much looked at in a lot of ways as a customer acquisition channel, also an activation channel. And the reason is we got way better and technology became available to understand exposure, understand folks who were exposed. And what followed from that was understanding conversion. So after people were exposed, did they convert to some lower funnel metric that advertisers wanted to track? And so out of home today, in a lot of ways, can be measured the same way that we're measuring digital channels. And that was sort of what we set out to build when we started Mira. And I'm going to sort of go through how we view the landscape, or I should say, how we view the flow of measurement in out of home, how it actually works. We're just going to spend a couple of slides talking about that. So to start, let's cover some vernacular here. There's two sides of the out of home measurement landscape. There's exposure and there's conversion. Exposure is, in this case, out of home. This is folks being exposed to digital billboards or, taxi tops or Volta charging stations. This is the exposure environment, as we call it, is the out of home channel. The conversion environment is what they're converting to. So this is like folks going to a website or downloading an app, visiting a store. There's several other ones. And in the middle of those, we have a device graph. The exposure, we're understanding that because of mobile location data. In some cases, conversion, we understand because of somebody going on their laptop, so that we know a mobile device and a laptop belong to the same person. That's how we use a device graph. So I'm not going to spend too much time getting into the technical weeds of how that works, but just a little bit of the lay of the land. So when we first started trying to measure out of home, it became very apparent to us that the thing that we had to get good at, the most important piece here, particularly as we were starting, is understanding exposure. And the reason is, in the type of analysis that we're doing, we need a lot of observations to make a statistically significant conclusion, to arrive at a statistically significant conclusion. And so you can't just take a sign and draw a big geofence around it and anybody that was in that sign, in that geofence, was exposed, because you end up getting a lot of folks in there that were not exposed, and that will thus wash out your results. Conversely, if you shrink that too much and you're getting too tight with the geofence, then you're missing out a lot of exposures and you will not have enough observations to arrive at statistical significance. So really the answer is you just have to get it right. So that's what we set out a lot of time early on doing, is figuring out how to understand who is exposed to an out-of-home campaign. So this is factoring in view sheds. This is getting a huge location data set and having it be high fidelity, meaning you see every device a lot of times per day. And then intersecting that with things like ad logs. Just because somebody was in front of a digital sign during the flight dates doesn't mean they were exposed to every ad on that loop, right? So we want to intersect the date and timestamp, the date timestamp with the folks that were there, so we understand precisely, a sample of the people that were exposed. Get my slides here. So that's the exposure. On the conversion side, I mentioned these three conversion environments. If you remember back a couple of slides, visiting a website, the way we understand that is putting a pixel on a website. You can put multiple pixels so you understand different types of goals, like did out of home get somebody to go to a website? Did it get people to buy something on a website? In-app events, we measure that through something called an SDK postback. And these are integrations that we already have existing with all the MMPs. These are companies like Kochava, AppsFlyer, Tune, Adjust, where very similar to a pixel on a website. This is kind of like a pixel in an app. And then location visitation. And that's using the same type of data, location data, that we use to understand exposure, now applying it to points of interest to understand, did people go to a store? So we have the exposure, we have the conversion. Now let's get those together. So this is the methodology through which the campaign that we're about to cover, this is how we measured it. We understood the control group because we took painstaking detail, tried to understand a sample of the people that were exposed. From there, what we're going to do is create a lookalike audience. Quite simply, just a group of people that look just like the control group or the exposed group. And this is a synthetic control in which we're matching a bunch of different demographic attributes, things like household income, age, gender, and then some technical attributes, things like, are they iOS or Android, things like this, and then geography. So said all that to say this: you have these two groups of people that look very similar across a variety of dimensions. The key difference in those two is one was exposed to the campaign and one was not. So from there, we can look at the conversion rates, which we just covered on how we understand what the conversion rate is. The exposed group converts at 1%, control group converts at 0.8%. That is a 25% increase in conversions, and that gets us a little bit down the road. We then take it one step further, and we want to understand, we also look at pre-post. So you have the control and exposed group, and in this graphic, you can see the x-axis here is time, the y-axis is conversion rate. You can see those conversion rates are very similar to each other up until the time the campaign starts. And what we want to see is that that exposed group increases, or the test group increases at a steeper slope than the control. And that difference in slopes, that difference right there in the bracket that I'm showing, that is the distilled impact that out of home has on whatever metric it is that we're measuring. So that's where we're starting from, and I'm going to let Mick go into a little bit about what we did specifically with Volta here.
Awesome, John, that's great. Thank you for taking us through that methodology. All right, so before we kind of get into Volta, I'd love to give you some context and some background. So John's flipping through the slides, and so here's where we're going to start. We're going to start super high, right? If you've been living under a rock, you probably don't know, but there are these things called electric vehicles that are taking over here, right? This transition into electric mobility is one of these massive seismic macroeconomic shifts that are occurring. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you will own an electric vehicle. Everything's in our favor, right? You got all of these forces from OEMs, you got local and big government, you've got improved technology around the battery and range life. And then last but not least, someone we care a lot about is this climate conscious consumer, a consumer who absolutely is looking to spend her money or his money against brands that are supporting and improving this earth, right, and the environment. So if you look on the next slide, what I'd say is all of these different forces, you know, help enable and empower, if you would, this EV charging revolution and a need for infrastructure. So as you can see in the picture, we are an EV charging solution, but the big point of difference is where we are located, the context that we provide, and the halo effect that it provides. So what do I mean by that? Our key location of our charging stations is literally footsteps away from places of commerce, all right? Contextual relevance, because of our unique location and our proximity to store, we have the ability of providing a branded message to consumers and provide advertising that ultimately will drive conversion, a keyword John said here multiple times. And then last but not least, the halo effect. The halo effect is all about, you know, being an advertiser and or a retailer in this case. By participating on our platform, you get a sustainability halo from consumers. Do I want to spend money at said retailer that has EV solutions or a retailer that doesn't? Do I want to support a brand that does support on a platform that supports EVs or doesn't? Again, they get to choose with their wallet. These are our key points of difference. And what I'd say as it relates to our charging stations and Volta Media, I want you to remember, and I'll go into this in further detail, I want you to remember two words, all right? It's the perfect intersection of sustainability and commerce, okay? So I'm gonna go into that here in a little bit. But again, where are we? Location, we're clearly all across the United States, 57, closer to 5,700 screens at this point, 1.1 billion monthly impressions are able to be served on a monthly basis. We're in top key DMAs and across 30 states. On the next slide, what you'll see is where we're located, right? So the one commonality across all of these different touch points between food and drug and mass, between retail malls, entertainment, the one common thread is that the consumer, that person who is going to be exposed to this ad, is going to open up their wallet. They're going to spend money. So our stations, unlike other charging solutions that are out there, that may be off the beaten path, that may be at some random charging farms, ours are located where people go live their life, where they go spend money, and where they go do things, right? And again, the one commonality is they're about to spend money. They're in that purchase mindset. 80–85% of our charging stations are located in food, drug, and mass, where people can buy everyday goods. So that will be critical as we talk about retail media. But next slide, John. So this is what it looks like if you don't know. It's super beautiful, 55-inch dual screens, both sides. We have the ability to serve up dynamic creative and provide that contextual relevance that I talked about. Consumer engagement. So we all know, especially in a post-COVID world, QRs are a commonality, but we have the ability of engaging with consumers as they are exposed to our ads. These are obviously subtle motion. You can see a P&G Oral-B execution here. And again, because of the subtle motion, the brands get the ability to tell a branded story and show the visual benefits of, in this case, the Oral-B toothbrush, the spinning head, the call to action, a drive to oralb.com. And then last but not least, mobile retargeting, which I think is really cool. And I'll talk a little bit about some of our other clients. But a key client like Michelin has leveraged mobile retargeting because at that point in time when that consumer is exposed to that ad, he or she may not necessarily be in the mindset to buy it, right? Based off of their purchase cycle. How do I ensure that I send that branded message to that consumer when the time is right? So here are a couple of our clients, key clients here. I'd say there's a tremendous breadth. There's some endemic categories that you see here. Auto obviously makes a ton of sense. I talked a little bit about consumer packaged goods as well, right? You got the Tides, the Oral-B's, and the Starbucks of the world. But you'll also see other very, you got financial services, you've got insurance, you've got banking, you've got consumer services, a host of verticals and categories, because again, it's the opportunity to provide a contextual branded message to these consumers as they are walking by our stations. So on the next slide, what you'll see is the first part of what I told you to keep in mind, and that's the sustainability piece, right? It's the halo effect. So Volta has been around for 10 plus years, and along with our media network. And what you can see here is just a cumulative numbers that we've provided. So to date, we have provided nearly 70 million pounds of carbon offset. All right, 150 million electric miles have been delivered, and 3.9 million gallons of gas have been saved. This is a key overview. And what I love about talking these numbers is whenever I connect with a chief marketing officer of a large CPG, I inevitably give them ammo to put money where their mouth is. We know a lot of these large companies are making big sustainability promises, not only to their shareholders, but also their consumers, right? And what I challenge them is name one media dollar that you have spent that has actually done and delivered against your sustainability goals. Clearly, they're doing things around packaging and their capital lines and their assets. But what are they doing as it relates specifically to media, and how can they, invest media behind a much more sustainable solution? So this is at an overview what we've done to date for all of our clients. On the next slide, what you'll see is what we've done specifically on a campaign for Michelin, right? So Michelin tires. This is exactly a 4-week campaign that they delivered. And what we do for a large client and significant campaigns is take their brand dollars and determine how those brand dollars are going to deliver real world impact. This is just one campaign. And this is what we've done from a post-campaign standpoint. But on the next slide, what you'll see is we just actually released last week the ability for not only our clients, but also our buyers and our strategy agency partners to go out there and proactively try to guesstimate, if you would, what the impact of a campaign can be, right? So what is my spend going to be? What is my share of voice? And how long am I going to run this media campaign? And what is its impact ultimately going to do to further our planet? So that's, I urge you to go out to voltacharging.com, go to our media kit, and you'll be able to, play around with that calculator. So again, this is the first part. It's all around sustainability, right? I asked you to remember 2 words. Sustainability is the first part. The second part of Volta Media Network is the conversion. right? So what you can see here is just a quick case study. It's anonymized, but what I realized is you may be able to detect what that brand is. It is a large granola company, granola bar company, and we all know for the brands, sustainability matters, right? It's around building brand equity. But that's only half of it, right? What gets those brand managers and those marketing directors promoted is how am I growing share? How am I growing sales? And how am I growing that at an incremental clip, right? So ultimately, their KPI, for lack of a better word, is sales lift. So, here's a perfect example. Because of our unique placement, literally footsteps away, as you can see in this picture, from that Kroger where this granola bar is sold, right? We have the ability, as John is walking into the store, to ultimately determine, just like he mentioned in his methodology in the upfront, was he exposed to the ad, right? And based off of exposure, as he goes into the Kroger store and puts that item in the basket and types in his loyalty card, thanks to the mobile ID that was now tied to his loyalty card, and to the individual, I can look at past 52 weeks to determine whether or not John has previously purchased this granola bar, or whether he's buying more of it, or whether he's making more trips. Again, the definition of incrementality, right? And what we found was delivering an incremental return on ad spend for this granola company of $2.57. What we see for the digital out of home space is an average of $1.33 for all other elements. Because of our unique placement, we are 93% greater and delivered a 257 and an amazing 13.3% sales lift. So again, this is what some of our key CPGs care about, along with the sustainability. If you look on the next slide, what you'll see is, they also see us as an extension of their retail media, but also an enabler of their ability to convert and drive sales. So a couple of key things as we're working not only with site partners, shopper teams, but also at the national brand level. We all know that when you walk into a store, there's a million messages. It's extremely fragmented, it's messy, it's crowded. How can we bring essentially a clean, uncluttered message out in the parking lot as consumers and shoppers are walking, helping them navigate, helping them understand what's going on in the store? That's the second part, amplifying the merchandising. It's this 1 + 1 = 3 phenomenon, right? So you have promotions, pricing, display, and merchandising going on inside the store. How do I amplify that on our ads before the shopper goes in? I talked a little bit about it on the last slide. Incrementality, go back, John. Incrementality is paramount, right? So how do I get that shopper to just put one more item into the basket? This is not about subsidization and getting John to buy what he's always bought. This is about getting new buyers and existing buyers to buy more. And then last but not least, like I mentioned before, the one commonality is this purchase mindset that people have, the ability that they're going to open up their wallet. So how do I become top of mind? Hopefully you guys know a little bit about mental availability. I urge you to do so, to Google mental availability, because that's what marketers care a lot about, especially if you have a brand that has high household penetration. But it's all about how do I get these consumers to think about me as they walk into the store, as they go online, as they go to websites and or download apps. And that'll be relevant here as John and I talk about the case study here in a second. But I think this is my last slide, and that is, for us, a key strategic pillar as we talk not only to our brand clients, but also to our strat agencies and our buying agencies, is all around measurement, right? We can always convince a client to do a campaign at least once. What we're all about is how do we essentially put money where our mouth is, number one, and then number two, provide them a reason to believe to put a plan against Volta and other key high delivering ROAS and or ROI solutions as part of their marketing plan, right? So what you can see here is 4 key ways we go to market with our clients in terms of how we want to measure. Again, all of this is dependent on what the KPIs are that the clients care about. So I tell you 2 things. Number 1, I never grade my own homework. I work with partners like Reveal Mobile and other trusted partners because at the end of the day, they have the methodology, they have the expertise. That's number 1. We never grade our own homework. And then number 2, what I'd also say is I don't try to force anything down the throat of our clients. If they have a vetted partner, then that's who we're going with. So in the case of Sales Lift, which I just shared you, we have strategic partnerships with Catalina, IRI, Nielsen, and Quotient. Again, I'll use Procter & Gamble as an example. Their solution provider for Sales Lift is Nielsen. All right, so going in there with a Catalina solution is not what we do. I know Reveal Mobile has P&G as a vetted partner of Procter & Gamble's as well. So, you know, that is how we think about how to bring these to our clients. But again, depending on where you are in the funnel and what the key KPIs are, you know, brand study awareness, trial, perception might be something that you're most interested in which case brand study is the way you want to go. Sales Lift and incremental ROAS, I just talked about who our partners are there, and honestly, that is what we're seeing to be a significant trend with a lot of our consumer packaged goods. Driving foot traffic and store visits, footfall, always going to be important. We have partners there with both Quorum and Foursquare. And then last but not least, drive to digital. So you saw the Oral-B execution I just showed you. That was a drive to oralb.com. Listen, a lot of these brands are not sold in the stores that we're right in front of. But again, because of that purchase mindset, because of that mental availability I talked a little bit about, we partner up with a lot of companies that are trying to drive services online, DTC, e-com, right? It's about sending them to the web, and that's honestly what we did with this client, which will be anonymous, but John will talk a little bit about the results. Passing it back over to you, John.
Great, thanks. So as Mick mentioned, anonymous client, I will say that they are an online and in-app sports betting brand, one of the major ones there. And we'll I'll talk a little bit about how we, you have the understanding on methodology, and now so what we're trying to figure out. I think Mick spent a lot of time wisely talking about, effectively the holy grail, like, did this get you to buy something in a store? But what happens when the conversion that we're after takes place off-site, takes place online, away from the store, away from where they were exposed? And here, this is what we drilled down on. So quick refresher on how the measurement works. We're essentially making 4 observations here. You have the control group and the exposed group, and we're looking at them pre and post. And if you remember that line graph I showed you with the 2 slopes at the end after the exposure, after the campaign started, said another way, the hypothesis is that the control group, the hypothesis is that the exposed group or the test group will have a larger positive lift pre to post than the control group does. So that's what we want to see in this campaign. And so a little bit about the campaign. It ran back in May through August, and the sample. This is the number of unique devices that we saw. So this is not impressions. Impressions are not unique, and we don't see all the people that were exposed. We see about 10% of them. So this was these are the devices that the mobile advertising IDs that we had to work with in this campaign, and the sample size that we're working with is how many unique users that were exposed that we saw. So we may have seen some of them more than once, but we're looking at unique. And then one more piece of information here: the brand themselves prefer a 14-day conversion window, which is what we recommend for this type of study. And a conversion window is simply after that user was exposed, they have 14 days to convert. They have 14 days to take whatever action it is that we're measuring. And if that action happens on the 15th day, then we do not attribute it as a conversion. It doesn't get credited to Volta's exposure. And so that's what the conversion window means there. So right off the bat, this is just an overall view of the campaign. This is sort of the all category. So all events, and remember, we're driving to in-app, right? So this is, does it get people to download the app? Does it get people to open the app? Does it get people to place a bet on the app or put money or register? But what we saw was during this study, there was essentially a 40%, 38.7% increase in post-only lift. So this is just looking at control versus exposed, right? Post-only, we're not looking at the pre on this one. So what this is telling us is that if you are in the exposed group, you have a 40% higher likelihood to convert to one of these actions 14 days after you were exposed than somebody who was in the control group. And the control group also only has a 14-day window, so that, you know, structurally is a fair comparison between the two. So off the bat, there's a great sort of headline to look at and say, you know, there was an effect from this campaign, a statistically significant positive effect. And the next thing that we want to understand, do these results hold across other views that we're going to take here? All right, so spoiler alert, they do. So on the first one, this particular graph, what we're showing here, and these start to turn into a little bit of an eye chart, but just listen to my words as I'm going to explain. I'm going to tell you what the trends are here, and this is all you're looking for when you're reading these. Like I said, it's a bit of an eye chart, but these are two different properties now. So this is essentially like, does it get people to take these actions on these two properties that this particular brand has, right? So there was essentially, think of it as two different apps. And the answer was, yep, it held. These results held. And the way that we know that a result was statistically significant is if you look at this shaded region here, that green shaded region, if you are above the zero line, then that means it was a statistically significant result at the 95% confidence interval. Meaning if we ran this test 1,000 more times, 95% of the time, we will have the same positive lift occurring no matter how many observations we took. So that's what we're saying. And essentially what we're trying to do is, the reason I was saying we need more observations of exposure, so we're trying to get rid of noise. We just want to know how confident can we be that if we run this again and again and again and again, using the same campaign but different pieces of the data, are we going to get the same result? And so in this case, we were very confident that, and the results held across both properties. So now, this is where it's really going to turn into a bit of an eye chart. But again, we're just looking at trends. This is just sort of, you know, how it has to look so that you can, you know, when you zoom in on something, you can see all the different pieces of it. And this isn't a PDF. Obviously, if it's in a dashboard, you get a cleaner view of this. But if we want to show it all, this is what it looks like. So now what we're looking at, now we're not looking at properties, we're looking at goals. So remember I said we have an integration with the MMPs, all the major ones, we already have that integration. So these are the goals that the brand wants to understand. All is all, that just means all actions. Now, does it get people to register across both apps? And I'll also warn that sometimes the goals will come in sort of like a code like this one. But, you know, does it get people to purchase? Does it get people to launch the app? Install the app? Does it get people to deposit in their account and register their account? And I believe there's two types of registration on this one that they were looking for. You can see the two different names for it. So what we see here is that the results hold across, because again, we want to see that shaded region. So if you can see the dotted line on the bottom of the green, that means it's positive, right? So the results hold across all of these different goals except first-time deposits, and first purchase. So what does that mean? The results didn't hold. Well, they were still positive. They were directionally positive, meaning we didn't achieve that bar of 95% confidence, which is a pretty high bar to achieve, but we have a positive correlation between the two of them. We can't necessarily say with all confidence that if you kept running this test, you would get the same result, but there's a lot of the noise has been taken out, and we're getting close to that. And what you'll see is also that places where we have lower confidence, that we do dip below zero, what that really has to do with is there's smaller number of conversions. Remember again, the point about we need observations. We need to maximize observations. So on these smaller types of goals that we're like, did it get somebody to make their first purchase? It just doesn't happen that often. So we don't get to observe it as much. But what we do see is a directionally positive result across this. So what's a brand do with this? Well, what a brand effectively does is they'll look at this and say, all right, where were we really strong? What did Volta really help us drive on this? And for that, you can just go through and look for the biggest numbers on there, right? The biggest numbers in green. So all registration, the first type of registration, I really couldn't tell you exactly what that means. We had 173% increase. That means if you are in the exposed group, you are almost 3 times as likely to do this type of registration that they're targeting. So that's a great learning for them. When that's what we want to drive in a particular market, Volta is a great one for us to work with on that. And then the other type of registration too is at 162%. What I would advise a brand to do is look at where you are the most confident. So find the biggest gap of white space underneath the shaded green area, and that's install. So our recommendation, if the brand came to us and said, what do you want to, what should we do with this data, is you could, and also the app launch. If you want folks to install your app and then you want them to open it in a particular market, Volta is your go-to for that. They did really well in driving that, and we measure a lot for this particular brand, so they might, they could also look at other channels and how they perform. But across the board, strong results. But if you really want to key in on a learning, here's where you can. This is what you do. This is how you sort of read these. And it's not about getting an immediate insight just by looking at the side chart. Just kind of like look at the trend and then zero in on the places that are most interesting to you. So that was the campaign that we ran with Volta. We're really excited about the results, and I think Volta was, and with good reason as well. So that's all for that, and we have a few questions that I'm going to get to. So question number one, this is I think kind of a joint one here. Curious if as EV charging grows in New York City, would tracking continue to work, or is it too dense? I can speak to it from our perspective, but let Mick start with how they view it on these different conversion environments, to use our word we learned today.
So I just want to make sure I understand that question, John. Tracking as it relates to for sales lift purposes?
Yeah, I would say for sales lift purposes.
Yeah, again, first of all, I'd say, the methodology and the efforts are always led by our third-party partners. So whether it's IRI, Nielsen, or Catalina, or Quotient, what they are looking at ultimately is no different than your methodology, a set of exposed and unexposed test control. Some do it at the household level, some do it at the DMA or the market level. What I'd say is if the question is specifically around New York increasing in the density, I don't have an exact answer to that, but I think they're looking at the entire network versus just specific DMAs. That's how, I don't know what from Reveal's point of view, what the answer would be for that question.
Yeah. From our point of view, our methodology is built sort of to work with this. And so we measure stuff in New York all the time. And so what the denser population gives us is, number one, it gives us a lot more observations, right? So that's a positive. And to your point, well, what if they're taking place up in a skyscraper For example, they're not down street level. Well, there's other ways that we filter out data that we think is coming from indoors, for example. But I will also tell you this, in the control and exposed example, in the methodology I gave you, that same, let's call it problem or bias, is going to be built into the control and to the exposed. And that's why we do this 4-prop methodology. We're not just looking at pre and post, because there could be, there's all types of time, time dependent variables that, for example, if we're looking at just pre-post, there could be a product launch coming up, but there's other media weight in market, or any number of things that could lead to what somebody be more likely to convert after they were exposed to out of home. But that same bias would exist in the control group as well, and thus those two should wash each other out. And so that's another way that we look at it.
John, I love what you said there, and that's consistent with the partners we work with who operate at the household level. So I'll talk Catalina. They look at the household level. So family 1 and family 2 may shop at the same Kroger, and so to your point, they're both exposed to the TV commercials, to the couponing, to the in-store promotions and all the noise. So to your point, that should wash itself out. The single point of variability is whether or not you were exposed to the Volta ad or whether you weren't, right? Based off of the mobile ID. So again, to your point, that it should technically be the only difference.
Yep. Here's a good one that I should have covered. What is an MMP? MMP, I think, stands for Mobile Measurement Partner, something like that. But these are folks that they provide an SDK for apps. So just a little bit of code that lives inside your app that you just go ahead and install. And what they are doing is they're helping apps understand where they essentially do attribution for apps. So like if this person downloaded you from the Play Store, where did they, which ones downloaded during this time period and what actions were taken after that. So MMPs are essentially for apps to understand what type of advertising gets them to, gets their users to take some action. I think it's Mobile Measurement Partner. For Mick, do you see different conversion metrics requested from different types of advertisers? Can you share more about how the metrics requested can vary?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So again, conversion's a big word, right? It's all encompassing. I'd say again, when we sit down with our clients and or our strat agencies, we have an honest conversation of what they want to measure, right? What are the key KPIs? We like to put those on the table on the upfront and hopefully understand what we're being held accountable to. So if you are a brand new spanking brand with very little household penetration, your goal, your KPI may be all about low awareness or driving awareness, right? Maybe about driving trial. The creative on our ad platform may be very much about, hey, we're brand X, launching this brand. In those cases, it's going to be all about brand study. What is the awareness drivers, that sort of thing. Again, another conversion can be to the client we just talked about with you. It's all about app downloads, right, and registration. It could be driving to everything from web clicks to actual purchase. It could be sales lift. So again, the key KPI is dependent on the client and where you are in the funnel and what matters most. And we tie that back to the measurement partner who can help us get to the answer.
Here's one I think I'm gonna sort of expand it, but verbatim, the question is: sports betting is typically male-oriented, were the screens selected based on male-oriented retail outlets? But let me expand that because I think it's probably pretty endemic to all advertisers that you see. There's some skew to their audience in a lot of cases, and I guess maybe a question is: can screens be selected based on a variety of different dimensions, whether they be demographic or interest based? I think that's an interesting point to give us about the Volta network.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it because we didn't really touch on it. What I tell you is the answer is 100% we can do that. So we ingest audiences. We have several ways of doing that. So one way is a client, I'll use Michelin, for example, gave us their segmentation models. We ingested it. We took their definitions of their different segments. You can imagine they're very different types of tire buyers. We ingested those and ultimately overlaid them on top of our existing partnership with Experian. And based off of that, we can, from an efficiency standpoint, I showed you 5,700 screens. We can determine which screens over-index against that definition against their key segmentation. So the answer to the question is yes, we can ingest audiences. We can identify which of our screens over-index against that audience and serve up that message accordingly.
Here's one actually I was wondering, I'm not sure if you have the answer though. How much are consumers charged when they charge their vehicles? Obviously that is going to vary by market and energy prices. But I'm curious, like, is there like a what's the Volta model on the charging piece?
So I just want to make sure, how much do we charge from a dollar standpoint, or what percentage of a charge do they get? Like, I don't understand the question.
From a dollar standpoint, I believe.
Got it. So today, especially on there's two types of chargers that we have out in the market. There is a charger called the Level 2 and a charger called the DC Fast. Our Level 2s are extremely, well, first and foremost, they are free. So again, as part of, on behalf of the retailer and the brands that are advertising the amenity and providing this amenity of free electric vehicle charging, we monetize behind the media. So again, today on our Level 2 charging stations, the electrons are free. On our DC fast charging stations, there is a charge. I don't know the exact charge, but it is absolutely subsidized based off of the advertising we received on our network. So it's cheaper than what you see out there in the balance.
So another one I think is we'll probably both have different answers for this, but let me throw it out, and so you're doing a lot of talking. I'll let you catch your breath for a sec here. How do you determine feasibility for a brand to do a measurement study? So said another way, one of the questions we get asked a lot is, how many impressions do I need to allocate in order to achieve a statistically significant result? That's not a great question. Your question's much better. Whoever asked that's phrased much better, but I'm just going to explain why I'm going to give you the "it depends" answer. But so the answer is we really just don't know if you will have a lift, right? A brand could be trying to drive folks into a retail location and buy a bunch of blacked out billboards. This actually happened. No logo, nothing, and want to do a foot traffic measurement study. That's not good. You could allocate 1.5 billion impressions to that. You're not going to see a lift because there isn't going to be one. So the way that we sort of like reframe that is, we try to give guardrails and say, at this impression level, we're confident that we will see a lift as small as X%. So that's a very complicated answer. So here's what we just say now. For us, we need to measure a campaign that's 10 million impressions or more. And that 10 million sounds a bit arbitrary, but it solves for several things. First of all, it gives us enough observations on the exposure side, right? That's pretty easy. More impressions, we're going to see more unique devices. On the conversion side, 10 million sort of controls for it's not a huge campaign, but it's not a tiny one either. We're not putting up a couple flyers and hoping it drives people to a website here. Like this, that's a significant campaign, and so it helps us control for number of observations on the conversion side too, because it's typically a mid-sized brand or larger that's doing that. And then we can and do measure campaigns smaller than 10 million impressions all the time. We just ask, it's like it's not a home run or slam dunk. that you're going to get. But at 10 million, we are confident that if there is a statistically significant lift, we will be able to detect it at that range. So that's how we think about it. What do you, Mick? What do you tell your customers?
Yeah, I mean, you remember the four circles, right? It could be foot traffic or footfall. It could be drive to digital. It could be brand study. It could be sales lift. To your point, the answer is it depends, right? And because it's a function of household penetration, right? It's a function of how broadly that product is distributed. It could be a function of how many markets we're advertising in. I'll be honest, 10 million across our entire network would be hard to reach statistical significance versus, picking one or two DMAs, right? So the answer is it depends. What we do, again, because we don't have the answers, our third-party partners do. What we have is essentially a feasibility form that our sales team and account organization fill out ultimately to determine, okay, what's the flight time? What's the budget? What's the share of voice? What are the brands? What are the SKUs that we care about? What is the promoted brand versus the franchise brand? And when you answer all of those questions and you put it and give it to the third party partner, they say, hey, at a minimum, you need X number of impressions to be able to reach statistical significance. So same answer to your question. It kind of depends on which, but there is not a hard and fast rule. Last example I would give you, and I know he's on the call, but a sales leader on our org said, hey, I want to measure sales lift on Ben & Jerry's. I'm like, great, we can do that all day, every day, right? Everybody's heard of Ben & Jerry's, Chunky Monkey, Cherry Garcia, right? But at the end of the day, what they were launching was a small brand new brand called Dough Chunks. All right, it was basically cookie dough chunks, little bite-sized pieces, if you would. Guess what the household penetration on that was, right? It was next to nil, right? So at the end of the day, the number of impressions to be able to measure that SKU and the sales lift on that SKU was out of this world, right? It was exorbitant and honestly a barrier to us doing it, at which point we convinced our client, listen, this is too small. This is probably not the right KPI since it's a brand new launch. Why don't we either A, look at overall franchise Ben & Jerry's, or think about a brand study? And so again, back to the answer, it depends.
Yep. Here's one. I get pre and post, but can campaigns get measured just on post exposure? So this is a great question. The study, the 4-prop study, is a gold standard sort of like, this is what, if it's effectively what the FDA uses in a double-blinded study. It's that same approach. The difference being we don't, you get to choose who's in the treatment group when you're doing a drug trial. For this one, we have to observe the exposed group and then create the control based on that. So there's a difference in that, but the 4-prop study is a fairly, robust approach. And we used to have this thing, we used to say this thing in the Marines, you don't always need the Barrett. The Barrett is a 50 caliber sniper rifle. It's an absolutely massive piece of equipment, and everybody always wants to, use that. But oftentimes that's a bigger tool than necessary. But so there are certainly times, and we showed one metric in here where you can just look at control versus exposed. Did the control perform at a different rate than the exposed did? Doesn't account for all the structural bias that might exist, but it does give you a directional result, and you can actually get there with confidence too. You can get there, get confident result out of that, or a statistically significant result. And conversely, you could look at no control whatsoever. You could just look at exposed. In the case that Mick gave, somebody was exposed to a granola campaign. And then they went in the store and possibly bought it. Well, they compare that behavior to historical behavior and just say this was their behavior pre, and now their behavior post. And so you look at those two things. I guess saying all that to say you don't need it doesn't necessarily need to be like the lab type of study every time that you're doing these campaigns. that you're measuring these campaigns. So for what it's worth, there are sort of pared down versions. A lot of brands do like to see the sort of like academically rigorous approach, which we sort of specialize in. And then, so that was the, oh, interesting one. Do clients buy based on CPMs?
Yes. Short
Quick.
answer.
I like it.
You can buy us programmatically, you can buy us direct. We're all about being easy for the client, however they want to buy us.
And then what data partners do you go through for your matching modeling process when you build lookalike audiences? Okay, so for us, for creating the control group, make your probably defer and say however your third parties do it, and think you guys are constructing your own controls. There's a few different ways to do it, but we're typically relying on some of the larger vendors that provide this sort of behavioral or the data, the demographic segmentation. These can be anything from like TransUnion, Newstar to Claritas. You could Experian, any one of these where we're getting a good match rate on the exposed group, and then understanding creating a control group using that same data set. So hope that answers that question. And then that is pretty much it, unless I'm missing any here. Nope. I think we got it all, and right in the nick of time. So that was efficient, quick work.
Well, thank you, John, so much for the invitation, and hopefully everyone got a couple of questions answered and a better understanding of Volta Media Network and how we work with great partners like Reveal Mobile. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining, Mick, and thanks for the partnership. Looking forward to doing a lot more awesome stuff here in the future.
Likewise. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.